Hey everyone, this is a video on the HL part of section 4.6, the balance of payments. And in this video, we are going to look at the implications of a persistent current account deficit, correcting a persistent current account deficit, and the implications of a persistent current account surplus. We're going to start by one implication of a persistent current account deficit, the exchange rates. So we know that the current account is mainly comprised of imports and exports, so the trade in goods and services. So that means that a current account deficit can come about in a couple of ways. We can be buying too many imports, so that's going to lead to depreciation, right? Or we could be selling not enough exports, less demand for the currency, depreciation. So both of these effects of a current account deficit are depreciationary, if that's a word. I don't think it is. So that's going to be the effect that we get. I think that's my son's fighting in the next stream. That's cool. That's fun for everybody. Okay, let's look at what this is going to do to an economy. We're going to look at this Indian economy for some reason. So how can the downward pressure on exchange rates lead to imported inflation? Well, that's pretty straightforward. It's the cost of imported factors of production. They're going to increase. So we're going to get the shift left of the SRAS, and we're going to get our cost push inflation, which can lead to the negative effects in the economy, of course. Now, higher interest rates. We know we have to balance out the financial account with the current account. So a way to induce foreign financial investment, that portfolio investment, people depositing their money in our bank accounts, that can be done by having higher interest rates. That sounds fine, but of course there are some problems with that because that is contractionary monetary policy. What that's going to do, that's going to discourage domestic consumption and investment, possibly lead your country to a recession. So that balance, that's where it falls apart a little bit. Another way that countries balance their balance of payments is by getting official borrowing in the financial account to make up. So we get that surplus in the financial account to make up for the deficit in the current account. So we get that foreign debt. There are consequences of this as well. Repayments have to be made, of course. That represents an opportunity cost for government spending which could improve the lives of people in the economy. So that can't happen. Significant levels of borrowing can also affect the credit rating of the country. We've talked about credit ratings a little bit already. This can mean higher interest on their borrowing, and that higher interest is going to lead to those repayments being higher and exacerbating the problems we've just seen about the lack of government spending on those merit goods. Okay, a higher credit rating can also mean that other countries see the country as being at risk of defaulting on their loans. Therefore, investors will be wary of holding that currency. They will want to sell it before it loses even more value. This makes the depreciation effect more pronounced. And we've seen what the depreciation does. The effect on the credit rating may also mean that investors are less likely to want to buy assets in the country. They'll lose confidence. So therefore, the country may not be able to gain as much foreign direct investment into the financial account. They might have to resort to doing other things, more borrowing or higher interest rates to get that balance. Okay, foreign ownership of domestic assets. So foreign investment, as we know, can help balance out a current account deficit. Now, foreign investment can be portfolio investment or foreign direct investment. Now, when these assets are sold to overseas, so let's say shares, real estate, factories, when they're sold to overseas interests, it means local countries can lose control over their own assets, or what were their assets. Plus, they don't get that income generated. That income generated flows overseas. Becomes an outflow in the current account. Okay, the effects of the current account on growth. So we'll go into depth on this real soon, but countries will do contractionary fiscal and monetary policies to reduce demand. Clearly, if a country reduces its AD, it hurts growth, right? And therefore standards of living, because people have lower incomes. They can't live the same life that they could before. And we've already discussed the opportunity cost of debt repayments. So the higher the debt repayments, that can lead to less government spending, which would also affect the growth. Now on to the 3 types of policies for correcting a persistent current account deficit. The first is expenditure reducing policies. So countries use these policies to reduce incomes in the economy. And if they reduce the incomes, they reduce imports. So they decrease expenditure. We'll go through how this happens. So decreased AD, decreased incomes. We know that. This then decreases demand for imports. Ceteris paribus, if we buy less imports, this will improve the current account balance. Right? That's the goal. We want to correct it. Also, decreased AD should decrease the price level. I'm sure you're already imagining what an ADS diagram would look like with a decrease in AD. We can picture that. We've learned previously that this makes a country's exports relatively more attractive. So we get that increased demand for exports, and we get decreased demand for imports because our local goods are now cheaper than the imports we could have bought. So both of these go towards improving the current account balance as well. Okay, then the main problem with this, of course, is that contractionary policies, they may not suit the macroeconomic objectives. So that they're going to hurt growth. They're going to hurt unemployment, and they may not be the right thing for the price level either. All right, on to our next type of policy, expenditure switching policies. So here's a definition of what these are. They're policies which switch the spending of consumers from imported goods towards locally produced goods. So one way they can switch people to buy fewer imports is by making those imports more expensive. So think of trade protection, tariffs and quotas. They make imported goods more expensive. Also, production subsidies will switch consumption to locally produced goods because it makes the locally produced goods cheaper. If we assume ceteris paribus, that nothing else changes, this would be great and would improve the current account balance. But this assumption can't hold for trade protection. The most likely result is that their trading partners will retaliate with trade protection of their own. The other expenditure switching policy is to depreciate their currency. As we've seen, a current account deficit should already be providing downward pressure on the value of the currency. The government and central bank just need to let it happen. A downside is as before, increasing the cost of imported factors of production, which causes that cost push inflation, which is what that should say, is that that increases the cost push inflation. And it's too late. I'm not going to re-record this. Okay, the third way of correcting a persistent current account deficit is with supply side policies. So these are used to increase productivity, which lowers the cost of production for firms, in the long term leading to lower inflation. We're just going to recycle this part of the flowchart from before to reinforce how this works to reduce the current account deficit. Okay, so we get that decreased price level and we see what that does to exports, what it does to imports, improves the current account balance. The main drawback of these supply side policies is there is a long time before these work. They gradually just cause lower inflation in the long term, so it takes a while for our prices to actually be lower than those of our trading partners. So that's going to make it take longer as well. All right, onto the persistent current account surplus and the implications of these. We're going to get through all these on the one slide, I reckon. Means that a country is producing, current account surplus means that a country is producing more than it consumes. We've seen this diagram before. This can mean that a country isn't maximizing their standard of living, because consuming goods and services is part of what increases our standard of living. We can do the things we want to do. We can buy the things we want to buy. Also, if there is a current account surplus, this implies a financial account deficit. So if investment funds we're doing more investment outbound, so using the country's money to invest overseas more than we're doing in local investment. So domestic investment, I should say. So if we don't have as much local investment, then that can hinder growth as well. Okay, we saw that a current account deficit leads to depreciation. Using the same logic, a current account surplus must lead to appreciation, right? This reduces exports and increases imports, and therefore can lower growth in the economy. Okay, lower inflation we get as well. The lower AD from the appreciation reduces demand pull inflation pressure, and the appreciation also lessens cost push inflation pressure, because imports become cheaper if we get an appreciating currency, right? The effects on unemployment are a bit mixed. So unemployment will increase due to decreasing AD, but it will decrease. That should say decrease, make that note. That should say it decreases. Unemployment decreases due to an increase in SRAS. I think I've done that classic mistake of confusing the terms unemployment and employment, and I've just messed it up there. So let that be a lesson to you all. I've definitely done that on purpose. And finally, we've got reduced export competitiveness. So we've seen this before. Due to the appreciation, our exports cost more to our trading partners, and therefore we don't sell as many. So that's one of the problems we get. A current account surplus will lead to an appreciating currency, which reduces the amount of exports we're really able to sell. Okay, we're going to go through some activities to reinforce this understanding in class. All right, thanks.